Merry Christmas, everyone. This year, at the busiest and most stressful time of year, I've decided to start my own top-down video channel. So I give you things I like. I'm basically just going to talk about whatever I want to, because I can. And why not? It's a bit of a Dank Pods ripoff. No denying it. But no one really needs to see my ugly face. And if they do, and that was their Christmas wish, well, I'm on some videos on Beth's channel, so I'll link one of those at the end. To start, for Christmas, I'd like to talk about one of my favourite books. And helpfully, on this edition, the title isn't on the cover. This is actually our family edition. We've got a whole collected Dickens that was given to us by a family friend and was probably produced over 100 years ago. But this one is important. What I want to talk about is the book, its enduring appeal, and why I love it so much. Christmas Carol was published on December 19th, 1843. Dickens was coming off the back of Martin Chuzzlewit, which hadn't been particularly successful and was, frankly, a bit of a flop. So I think it's fair to say that Dickens was somewhat embittered by this experience, and a lot of what he was going through probably went into A Christmas Carol, which is a ghost story of Christmas. I'm not going to cover off the story, everyone knows it. Ebenezer Scrooge is visited by 3 ghosts on Christmas Eve and ends up a better person. Coming out so close to Christmas and being in a very expensive volume, the book wasn't initially successful. But by spring 1844, it was being serialized in several magazines, something Dickens took injunctions out against. It also had several unauthorized stage productions, some of which Dickens himself attended, so he must have found those somewhat more charming or intriguing. The initial publication had 8 drawings by John Leech, some in full colour. These would have been very expensive to produce at the time, and I really loved them. I think these drawings, as well as the cinematic nature of Dickens' writing, are the blueprint for the way this story has been adapted again and again. I actually have this drawing as a full-colour woodblock print that I keep up all year round, because I think the Ghost of Christmas Present is one of the most important characters in literature and one of the ones I most relate to. Later versions of the story, often the ones meant for children, would come with drawings by Mark Pepe, which I believe were done in the 1980s but may have been done earlier. These are darker and more scratchy in their reproductions, and there's just plain more of them throughout the book, even though I unhelpfully can't find them here. I think because of this, you often find editions that contain these drawings rather than the John Leech ones. Often the John Leech ones are in collected editions, reprints of other things. They're not often in standalones, and I'm not entirely sure why that is, but I think possibly it is just because there are more Mark Pepe drawings than there are John Leech drawings. My love of Christmas Carol goes as far as owning a bunch of merch for it. This is a map I was given as a present that is a walkthrough of Dickens' London in relation to Christmas Carol, and it contains some of the John Leech drawings. And so you could actually do a tour of London based on A Christmas Carol and visit some of the places that would have inspired Dickens to write the story. I also have this, which is obviously just a bag, but we do the Christmas Eve book giving tradition, so I get to open this on Christmas Eve. But it's inspired by, or draws upon, I suppose, the original release, the red and gold release of A Christmas Carol from 1843. It would be lovely, I suppose, if someone did a reprint of that edition. I know it didn't sell in great numbers, it was a small print run, they were very expensive volumes, but it would be amazing if someone did a reprint of that edition with the John Leech drawings, with the ones in colour, and almost just reproduced that original release. All of this probably gives you an idea of how much I love Christmas Carol. Now this next item, it's a little bit of a weird crossover, but just go with me on it. This is Batman, not even Bruce Wayne, but Batman as Ebenezer Scrooge. And I don't know why it exists. There's literally no reason for it to exist. But I'm in the perfect Venn diagram for it. I love Batman and I love Christmas Carol, and this sits perfectly in between. There's no reason for it to exist. Pop made it, I bought it, and it sits out all year and I love it. And we'll get to my love of Batman in a later episode. Even with the name of the show, I don't want this to just be about why I love A Christmas Carol. I also want to cover its influence in culture. Last Christmas alone, there were 2 major advertising campaigns that drew on A Christmas Carol for their inspiration. One was for a supermarket, which featured a banana version of Ebenezer Scrooge called Ebenana Scrooge, and they produced a toy of Ebenana and the various other characters from the campaign and put them on sale, and they were a sellout, and everyone got angry when they couldn't get hold of them. And the other was for one of those overly expensive exercise bike service providers who seemed to base their idea on the idea that if you got fit, you wouldn't be a miserable swine anymore. But I think one of the reasons we all know and like Christmas Carol so much is because of the various film and TV adaptations. I really love film and TV, and I'm not going to exhaustively cover off all these versions, but a lot of them are very good and feature really, really good actors. There's a Patrick Stewart one for television that was done in the year 2000, I think, which is very good. There's one from the 1980s starring George C. Scott that's very good. And there's a musical one from the 70s with Albert Finney that I was never really that big a fan of, but a couple of Christmases ago, me and my father watched all of it in the morning and spent Christmas Day singing the songs to each other. So that now makes my cut too. I think for a lot of people it will come back to the Alistair Sim one, which people will either know as Scrooge in the US or A Christmas Carol in a lot of places. A lot of people find that the definitive one. The thing to remember is that a lot of other films and TV draw inspiration from A Christmas Carol. It's a Wonderful Life is effectively a version of A Christmas Carol. A lot of TV episodes and adaptations and Christmas episodes draw influence from Christmas Carol. A lot of the being a better person type things do too. And the one that always strikes me as very memorable is the Blackadder Christmas Carol from the 1980s. But if you want to hear more about those, over on GAMF, which is the podcast I do with G3. Hey G3, we did an episode a couple of years ago where we were talking about A Christmas Carol, but we weren't saying which version of it we were talking about. We were trying to guess. So we both picked an adaptation of it and we tried to describe the specifics of it so that the other person would guess what it was. It was pretty fun. It's worth having a look at. I'll link it above. But right now I want to focus on three adaptations. Three adaptations. Ones I think everyone can enjoy at different levels, and one specifically that I think is the best. One is from the New York Public Library, where in 2014 Neil Gaiman read one of Dickens's own prompt copies that they hold, and they put it out most years on their podcast feed, so it's well worth checking out and it's pretty easily available. The other wasn't available for years, and it is available now on Disney+, and it's Mickey's Christmas Carol. Made in the early 80s, it covers the main beats of the story in about 25 minutes and recasts some of the main roles with Disney characters. And if there was ever a role that Scrooge McDuck was born to play, it's Scrooge. But for me, there's one adaptation that's head and shoulders above the rest. It covers off the main beats of the story, it's very light and accessible, but it doesn't hide the darkness of the story either. But it is viable for an entire family audience. And you might have guessed it. I'm talking about The Muppets. Muppets Christmas Carol was so good that it effectively brought the Muppets back into popular culture, but also haunted the franchise itself for the next 10 years, because nothing could be quite as good as this was. I'll probably do a whole episode on the Muppets one day, because I really, really like the Muppets. But it's worth considering that Muppets Christmas Carol is both the defining adaptation of A Christmas Carol of our age, but also potentially the pinnacle of the whole Muppets franchise, and the songs are bangers. I think one of the masterstrokes of Muppets Christmas Carol is including Charles Dickens as a character and presenter of the story. It manages to bring in some of that cinematic language from the book directly as part of the presentation of the story. The opening line of the book, Marley was dead to begin with, is actually said by Gonzo at the start of the film. And there's a reason that's the opening line. It's such a mood setter, and conveying it that way is absolutely perfect, because I think it sets you up right for the story. It's got a lot of joy ultimately, but it's got a lot of darkness along the way. And this one doesn't dodge the issues of Dickens's time. I mean, the mouse asking for cheese is heartbreaking. And ultimately, I think if Dickens was trying to say anything about Christmas, his view on Christmas, and setting a template for a lot of what we consider Christmas today, is that it's about togetherness, and that no one gets left out. Even Batman. Which I think for me is why I consider it one of the greatest literary and adapted filmic works of empathy. And I think you can draw a 170-odd year line between its publication and what Christmas is now. Our modern Christmas is very much based on Dickens's view of Christmas, and specifically A Christmas Carol. I think there is something slightly more modern also that is a great story of empathy, works for a whole family audience, but isn't linked to a specific oldie, and has something universal that we can all take from it. And that's E.T. But we'll get to that another day. Merry Christmas, everyone. And as Tiny Tim observed...